there were people that saw these things. There were people that heard Jesus speak, that sat on hillsides and heard the very words out of his mouth. And yet, people didn't believe. People didn't like what he had to say. They were offended by it.
Welcome to this episode of The French Press. Let me pour you a cup of coffee while we talk about intrigues of faith, pages we've dog-eared, and the life in between on The French Press.
Welcome back to another episode of The French Press, where we talk about books I've read and intrigues of faith and the life in between. I am recording in the evening today, which is not something I normally do. I usually record during the day, so I just have Scout to contend with, but there's a little more happening tonight, so I had to be like, all right, I'm recording. I'm in my studio, which is actually my bedroom floor, and I set up my little makeshift studio, and I have my books and my little lights, and I have this whole little setup I go through. And the minute I decided to start, my neighbor also decided to start sanding something in his driveway. So I thought at first there was a horde of angry wasps outside my house. And then I thought maybe it was drones, like maybe my neighbor was flying drones over my house. But oh no, he's just sanding things in the driveway, and it's very loud. And I tried to record and play it back and see how much I could hear it. And I didn't think I could hear it a lot. My editor will be sure to let me know how much we can hear it. But I apologize for the weird bee noise in the background. That is my neighbor sanding. And I don't even know. I already set up my studio. I feel like I just have to move forward and hope he stops. We will find out. So last time I left off, I wanted to talk about John, and I didn't quite get to it. So I try to read my Bible every day, and I'm usually kind of flipping back and forth between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And right now I'm in Leviticus and I'm in John. And I've really been enjoying John this round. You know, I read it probably once a year, unless I'm doing studies or looking things up. I might read it more. But I'm really getting a lot out of John right now. Highly recommend John if you haven't really sat and studied it. But I'm going to be picking up in John 6. And I'm going to kind of paraphrase some of the verses to you. I might read some of them, but I definitely encourage you to go read for yourself John 6 and, have the Holy Spirit interpret it for you and read it over a couple times. But I'm going to kind of give you my thoughts because this really struck me when I read through it, and I wanted to mention it. So in the beginning of John 6, Jesus does a miracle where he feeds a lot of people. I can't remember if this is the 5,000, but they don't have enough food for the people. They just have like a couple baskets of bread. And the disciples are like, what are we going to feed all these people? And Jesus just start passing it around. And they pass the loaves around and there's enough for everybody. And the disciples are pretty amazed by this, as anybody would be. And so they start to have a conversation about it kind of right around verse 26. And Jesus answers them and says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, you seek me not because you saw the miracles, but because you did eat of the loaves and were filled." So they were eating of this, magical bread. Like Jesus had kept this bread going. There's a miracle happening where there's just enough bread for everybody, and they eat it and they're filled and they're really amazed by it. But he's saying, don't labor for, they use the word meat here, but the food that perishes, but labor for the food that endures for everlasting life, which is the Son of Man. And, they're not fully understanding what he's saying here. So they say, well, what should we do that we might work the works of God? And Jesus said, this is the work of God, that you believe on him who has been sent. And so then the disciples, because they're kind of having this connection to bread, and he's saying, don't labor after the bread. They say, oh, okay, like the manna that Moses gave our fathers. And if you're not familiar with the story of the Israelites wandering about the desert, you need to go read that story too. It's a really good one. But The Israelites have been liberated from slavery in Egypt, and they're out wandering in the desert, and God feeds them through manna. He rains this kind of bread-like substance from heaven. I mean, some research I've heard is it's kind of like a wafer. And this is what they eat. They eat this manna from heaven, and people will call it angel's food and like the perfect food. So they're referencing back to the story of the Israelites and saying, oh, okay, we know what you mean, like the manna from heaven. And Jesus says, no, Moses didn't give you bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. And of course, he's referring to himself. Jesus is the bread from heaven. So then the disciples are like, well, give us this bread. Like, we want this bread that you're talking about. And this is when Jesus says, I am the bread, and he that comes to me will never hunger or thirst again. And we hear this theme in several spots in scripture. There's the story of the woman in the well, and Jesus, or of the, at the well, and Jesus asks her to bring up some water from the well. And he says to her, well, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me for water, because I have water that's living water. And if you drink of it, you'll never thirst again. And she's amazed by this. And so it's kind of the same concept of you are striving after bread and food and water that's earthly. It'll leave you wanting. It will never satisfy you. It will never be enough. And we often chase after these things, not just food, but concepts of the world or philosophies of the world. You know, we're chasing after these things that we think have the answers. And yet Jesus is telling them here, only I have the answer. I am the only thing that will satisfy you, and you won't be hungry and you won't be thirsty. But it's so difficult for them to understand. I mean, it's difficult for us to understand still today, but certainly for them, because they didn't have the Bible and they didn't have all these teachings. They're being taught this for the first time, and it's revolutionary and it's wild, where a lot of us Christians have heard this concept a lot and it's maybe lost its meaning. And when I read through the Bible, I try to read it with fresh eyes, which is difficult because I've read it like 22 times. And I've heard a lot of commentary on it, and I've studied it, and I try really hard to read it as if I don't, like, you know, what's happening here? And I'm asking questions and what's going on. And this is what they're doing. And this is the experience you kind of get through their eyes, is they don't know what he means. So they go on. So Jesus continues on. I'm in verse 47 now. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believe on me has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness, and are dead. This is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat therefore and not die. I am the living bread, which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. So he's explaining to them that the manna their forefathers, the Israelites, were given in the desert, they ate that manna, but they're all dead. They did not get everlasting life. And he is offering them something different. He's offering them himself, essentially, but it's a really hard concept for them to get, and in ways for us to get, that he is the one. We have to get our nourishment from him. We have to get our satisfaction from him. It can't be from worldly things, from baked bread and water from a stream. Those things will keep us going, but we will get thirsty again. We will get hungry again. And when we find our satisfaction in entertainment, or even our family and good things, exercise and lifestyle choices, you know, kind of, well, I live a healthy life and we, you know, do all these things to be healthy. And those things are great. There's nothing wrong with them. But if that's what you think will cure you or make you better, it won't. It will always leave you wanting. And we have to always remind ourselves that the things we're chasing after, even if they're good things, they can't be the ultimate goal. And this is kind of Jesus reminding them, you'll never be satisfied on these things. So he teaches them this concept in Capernaum in the temple. So then about in verse 60, many of the disciples, when they heard this, said, this is a hard saying. Who can hear it? And Jesus knew in himself that the disciples murmured, and he says unto them, does this offend you? And so I think that's an interesting idea of when Jesus says, I'm the only way, I'm the only thing that will satisfy you, I'm the ultimate answer. And sure, other things can help and they can be a band-aid and they can limp you along, but I'm the only answer to your problem, which your problem is you're always going to be hungry and you're always going to be thirsty. And I'm the only answer to that. And I'm the only answer to your bigger problem, which is death, because I'm offering you life and the world is offering you death, or the enemy's offering you death, but I'm offering you life. And they have a hard time hearing that. They just can't wrap their minds around it. They're like, this is a very strange saying, Jesus. We don't understand what you mean. Like, you're the bread? What does that mean? And even though we can have a greater understanding of what he meant, they are really hearing this concept for the first time. And I'm trying to imagine it in their heads. And they're just like, oh, I don't know what to think about this. And then he's saying, are you offended by this idea? And how often are we offended by that? We don't want him to be the only answer. We want to also have our other things that we use and try, or we talk to these people and we like these ideas. And again, it's not like there's anything wrong with these things, but they can't be the final decision. The final thing has to be Jesus and the Lord, and it has to be, what he tells us in his word. And we have to be satisfied on that and not on these other worldly things, or the manna, which was a representation of Christ, but was not Christ himself. And now he is there in the flesh before them. And he's saying, I'm here. I'm the living bread. And he says to them in verse 63, it is the spirit that quickeneth, the flesh profiteth nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life. And again, he's speaking of how we run after things in the flesh, right? We run after the bread and water of this world. And he's saying there's no profit there. You will lose this body someday. You will lose this home. You will lose all these things you've worked for. When you die, you will lose all of these things. And they are really just tools to use while you're walking through this world. We need houses and we need clothes and we need to eat bread to keep living. I mean, God made us that way. But ultimately, he's saying that there's no profit in these things. They are just a means to keep us going, to keep us moving. And what we really need is what quickens our spirit, and that is him. He is the life. He is the way. He is the light, he tells us. But there were some of you that don't believe. And it says that Jesus knew from the beginning that they didn't believe, and he knew who would betray him. He's speaking of Judas Iscariot there. And then he said, therefore said I unto you that no man can come unto me except it was given unto him of the Father. And from that time many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him. And then Jesus said unto the 12, will you also go away? So here we have people that experience Jesus in the flesh. And I think as Christians, a lot of us, or I like to think, oh, if I got to see these miracles, if I saw the water turn to wine and the bread that, just keeps going and feeds all these people. And, I got to see lepers healed and blind people restored sight. I would believe, who wouldn't believe? It's amazing. And yet there were people that saw these things. There were people that heard Jesus speak, that sat on hillsides and heard the very words out of his mouth. And you think, well, that's the closest you can get, right, to experiencing God on earth in the flesh. It's Jesus, who is God and man at the same time. You just feel like this is like heaven touching earth when he walked among people. And yet people didn't believe. People didn't like what he had to say. They were offended by it. Like, you're the bread of life? Oh, I don't think so. We're out of here. And so I think that's interesting how even from his very words, even knowing him and seeing him and watching miracles, people still turned away and people still couldn't accept it. It was too hard for them to hear. Then Jesus had said unto them, to the 12, will you also go away? So these other people have left. And now he's saying to the 12, are you guys going to go too? And Peter answers him and says, Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. And I think of this all the time. When I come to the end of myself, when I come to the end of all my other resources, I've talked to all the friends and I've pursued all the worldly routes and I'm trying all the things that are supposed to work and they're not working. And I'm mad and I'm disappointed, and you're tempted to be mad at God and you're tempted to say, well, why aren't you fixing my problems, or why aren't things getting better for me? And yet I always end up right where Peter ends up. And I quote this verse to myself and to other people all the time. This is in verse 68. And just, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. And I just love those words, and I've held on to them and I've spoke them to other people when, you're going through a time where you're really struggling, and maybe you're struggling in your faith and you're struggling with the Lord and you're not understanding why your life is looking a certain way. But yet, where would we go? And just like Peter, it's like the cry of his heart is sort of like, this is hard to hear, God. I'm having a hard time with what's happening here. But also, I know there's no other answers. I know there's nowhere else to go. Like I found you. I found the answer. And when we come to Christ and when we come to faith and we come to salvation, we know in our spirit, this is the answer. There's no other answer. And things might look rough and things might feel rough, but this is the answer. And I rest on these words with Peter all the time. And just like, there's nowhere else to go. It doesn't matter how I feel or what I'm thinking or what the world's telling me. There's nowhere else to go. You have the answer. You are the answer. And that's going to bring me into this next book that I started. It's called When God Doesn't Fix It by Laura Story. A friend of mine heard her speak and bought the book and read it, I think in like one sitting, and then asked me to read it. And it's been really amazing. I really recommend it. This isn't my typical style of book. It's kind of a modern contemporary story about what someone's going through and kind of her reflections on it. And it just isn't the type of book I normally like go into. And I love it so much. I just couldn't recommend it enough. I'm probably more than halfway through, but it's going to lead right into this question of, he's the only answer. Things are going to look rough. Things are going to be hard. We know the disciples are going to go on to go through really hard things, and yet they have the answer, and the Lord is going to walk through them with it. But they already have the answer, the key to life, the bread of life. They already have it, no matter what's happening in your life. And so in this book, Laura Story is a musician. She's a worship leader. She's written songs, contemporary songs that you've probably heard of. I've heard of many of them, but I didn't really know who she was. Maybe some of you do. But what happens in her story is her husband gets a brain tumor. They're very young, newly married, and he starts having all these health problems, and he ultimately gets a brain tumor and has to have operations, and he ends up losing his short-term memory and just having a really hard recovery. He does survive it, but he's never the same. He is permanently altered. I think. I'm not quite at the ending. I'm not quite sure where it's going to end up, but so far, over halfway in the book, she's really had to come to terms with the fact that her life is not going to look the way she thought it would. She's in ministry. He, I think, was doing something with art and ministry. And she just thought, at some point they'd have kids and he was going to work and she was going to stay home. This was kind of her dream she talks about, or at least, that was sort of the plan, that she wouldn't keep working. And they would have this family. And after his recovery, she keeps thinking he'll get better. Like, all right, it'll take some time, but he'll get better. And they kind of come to the conclusion at one point that this might be as good as it's going to get. And like, yeah, he can take care of himself and he can walk and he can get around, but he couldn't keep down a full-time job. And she doesn't know if he could father, and she's going to need to work full-time to take care of them. And so these are just very big disappointments in her life, not the way she saw her life looking, not only going through this trauma of what's going on, but coming out the other end. And even though, like I said, he survived it, which is a huge answer to prayer, their life is completely altered and looks completely different, and they have to rework who they are and what their marriage looks like. And I just thought her insights on this challenge and this suffering are so good and so raw and so real. And I want to spend some time talking about it. She talks about how she's disappointed, that this is what the Lord let happen in their lives. But she comes to realize, and this is early on, she has a lot to go through yet, but she comes to realize that there's something bigger that's broken in kind of her concept of who God is and what this life looks like. So I'm going to read this little part to you. It's hard to understand why sometimes Jesus heals and sometimes he doesn't. When it feels as though he's turned his back and walked the other way, it's hard not to be disappointed, maybe even angry. But while we're focused on the unhealed sickness, hurt, and pain in our lives, God is focused on a bigger picture. Something else is broken, and it has eternal consequences if it doesn't get fixed. It's our relationship with our Creator. Our broken relationship with God continues to cause us pain even when our life is going well. Though he loves us, he'll allow us to feel the pain of the world's unhealed hurts if it brings us closer to him. And she kind of, the idea in this chapter is that we have this myth that God's primary desire is to fix broken things. But the truth is, God's primary desire is to fix our broken relationship with him. So even though, you might be going through something hard, you might be having health problems or marriage problems or financial problems. You may be struggling in your faith and, struggling with people that have hurt you and disappointed you. And we think like, well, why doesn't God want to fix this? Why doesn't he make this better? He could, and he chooses not to, and that feels hurtful. And the point she's making is that God's desire is to bring you closer to him. He doesn't desire to hurt us or bring us pain, but he can certainly redeem that pain. We live in a broken world that these things happen. And sometimes they're results of sin, and sometimes it's just a result of broken world, and people get sick and people get hurt, or we lose our jobs, or we make bad mistakes and then we pay the consequences for it. And sometimes we start to compare and we think, well, this isn't as bad as what this other person did and their life seems great. And we can just really spiral out with how we process pain and suffering. And yet God's desire is always to fix our relationship with him. And he promises to never leave us and never forsake us, to walk through everything with us. And she learns throughout this book that, God is really drawing her close, and he's bringing her into a closer relationship. And sometimes when I think we're going through a lot of pain and trials, we want to isolate. We want to isolate from community, from the church, and we want to isolate from God. And we might be like, well, I don't want to read your word, and I don't want to pray to you because I'm mad at you. And really, the opposite is what we need, just like Peter knew when he said, where else do we go? You have the words of eternal life. So if you're in a spot right now where you're maybe feeling like you're a little disappointed or angry and you're not wanting to pursue your faith and grow in your faith, I encourage you to take heart in Peter's words and know that there is no other answer, that Jesus is the bread of life. He is the answer. He is the key. He is the door. He is the way and the path. And we just want to get back on that and get back aligned. And God can handle our anger and our hurt and our pain. He can handle that. But what he desires is relationship with us. I'm going to talk about this book more next time, but I did want to go back to John, and I found something interesting when I was sort of researching manna and bread. I found that this shows up again in Revelation, and I was praying this prayer. The concept is sort of like the overcomer's prayer, and it's taking all the ideas of the churches in Revelation and the things that they overcame and just kind of praying those things over yourself in your life. And I came across this one, which is in Revelation 2:17. I hope I wrote that down right. But this is Pergamos, and they are told to eat of the hidden manna. And I found that really interesting. And so I looked into that a little bit. And basically, the manna is Jesus, and he is the living bread. And it is the manna that sustains and strengthens us. And so then the question is, well, why is it hidden? Why are they eating of a hidden manna? And a lot of the commentary I read is that this manna, this hidden manna, is only given to believers. So in Revelation 2:17, it's those who are victorious endure in their faith. So believers, those of us that have chosen to believe that Jesus is the Son of God and died on a cross and rose 3 days later, that we may be covered, our sin is covered, and we can reconcile our relationship with God. If we believe that and take that gift, we are also given the hidden manna, which is Christ. Christ himself is the hidden manna. And so if you're going through a trial and you're struggling, I just really encourage you to eat of the bread of life, eat of the hidden manna, pursue the word, pursue prayer, find a community, a church, find Christian friends who will pray over you. Sometimes we can't pray for ourselves. I have definitely had times where I was just so mad or angry or depressed or sad, I couldn't pray, and others could pray for me. And I've had the same where people are just really going through something and the Lord impresses it upon me that, oh, you're supposed to pray. You're the one that's going to pray over them. And I call them up or I go over to them and I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to pray. I'll do it for you. And so sometimes we have to pray for each other because we just get kind of stuck in a spot. I'm looking forward to talking about when God doesn't fix it more. I'm going to bring more out of this book. And I have other books I didn't even get close to getting to. So we will do that next time. But thank you for joining me today on the French Press. I'm so glad you joined me today on the French Press. If you liked what you heard, you should follow me. That way you'll get all the latest episodes. And if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to rate the show. Also, if you'd like to follow my blog, The Demi-Tasse Drafts, I have a link below in the show notes. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Anytime you can leave a like, comment, reshare a post. All these help my ministry get more traction. The most important thing you can do is pray. I really appreciate all of your support. Thank you for sharing a French Press with me today.